Thank you very much for the invitation. Pleased to be here. Thank the organizers, IIF and its chairman. I understand you'd like to listen about Egypt and our experience over the last couple of years. I was thinking about that on my way here. And I thought, I've looked at your schedule, and there's a lot of technical discussions that have been taking place over the last day, over this day and yesterday, and I want to give you a different dimension and a different flavor about what's behind what has been happening in Egypt on the economy side. Actually, when we started this in October 2015, it was out of conviction that the Egyptian economy was not treated fairly over the last years and has got much of a potential than what it has been delivering recently. And from this perspective, we had a vision how to reposition economic policy. And it was not economic measures or policy measures. I think it was more of a transformation, because it was transformation in the way that policy has been managed over years, transformation in the culture, the way of thinking, and the way governments operate. It is a different concept than the concept of control. Governments like control, and governments are afraid of giving up control. And this is where the big decision is, where you have the courage to decide to give up the control. I remember when I was reading about the Irish conflict and some lessons learned about the political conflict in Ireland and the UK. And one of the lessons learned was that the police forces thought that they can conclude this conflict by force. And one of the lessons learned was that this is an illusion. This is the way our economy has been managed, sort of, by trying to control events. We have taken a different approach, and with our conviction in the potential of the Egyptian economy, and we found that the Egyptian community wants us to take them from the existing economic situation to the economic aspirations, to the kind of economy they are aspiring for. They've been for years understanding intuitively that they have potential, and they don't know why is it not working out. And with government bureaucracies, the difficult decisions are always avoided. We have been fortunate at the central bank that we have adopted a different way of management since 2004, and we brought in professions in the central bank who really extract their satisfaction from achievement. And we had a very strong sense to achieve, and we had a good plan. We put the plan together. And some people will say you have to have cohesion. You have to have cohesion with the government, with the stakeholders, with the parliament, with the media, with the community. This is not true. It's not always cohesion. Sometimes you can have buy-in and cooperation, and sometimes you can't. And we have been able to bring parliament on board by confronting the issues and providing our plan and our vision. And it was not a bet, because we were very confident about where we're going. But in terms of the media and the public opinion, there was a lot of concern and anxiety about where we're going. But the key decisions and the strong decisions about the flotation, which is the most difficult decision and which the most far-reaching on the economy and the lives of everybody. How it was done, there were tactics implemented there. And I think the tactic the main tactic that was implemented for the flotation was that we have induced the crisis and triggered the crisis to heighten, in order to bring the community to start feeling that they want to cross the waters. So when we heightened the crisis to its maximum starting July by announcing that we are abandoning the fixed exchange rate and that the fixed exchange rate was damaging to the economy, and this kind of confrontation was shaking and was shocking, but by heightening the crisis and over the following months, people started calling for the flotation. So there is a lot of psychology in what has been happening. And also there is a lot of politics. And it is important to be able to present the situation in the way that we can get the political clearance for it. The concept that we have adopted was like two things. First, that Egypt does not need any support, financial support from any country. Egypt can depend on itself. Egypt has the resources and the capabilities and the people and the market and the diversity that it can take the economy into a positive direction independently. And this is the concept we agreed that we are going to adopt. And we decided to adopt policies that are familiar to everybody in the world and that are transparent and that can inspire confidence to the local investor. The results were incredible, because while we were striving for $1 billion here or $1 billion there from our partners, since November 3, Egypt in total has received $70 billion in various types of flows, of international flows. This, of course, is significant. This created a lot of stability, and this restored the confidence very quick. It was amazing also how the economy is responding in terms of the industrial sector, the current account sector, the capital account, the international account of the country, the international trade accounts of the country. Things fell into place very quickly, and we have witnessed more than 21% improvement in the current account in the first few months. This was fantastic, and we believe that our problem with the current account by the end of 2018 will be gone, because our current account will be fully funded, deficit will be fully funded by foreign direct investments. And if we have portfolio investments or if we have external debt, this will be over and above our requirements. We have broken a number of taboos. We have changed the culture of managing a closed economy, managing conservatively. We've broken a number of taboos and concepts. Before, the IMF was a bad word. And as I used to say, even my brother was really very angry when he found that I'm bringing in the IMF. And now people understand that the IMF is not a bad word. We confronted our fears, and the community confronted its fears concerning certain matters and was able to bridge the gap of these fears, like the IMF, working with the IMF, or a floated exchange rate, or tackling the subsidies, or increased taxes, or privatization, or IPOs. All these were taboos that were hindering our economy, and it was really unfair to the economy. And however, when some fund managers ask me about other countries and why they're not doing the same, I tell them this is not easy. This is close to the impossible, because these decisions make foundation changes. It makes like a shake-up in everybody's life across these societies. We were lucky because our people who go back thousands of years, they have this intuition and they have the wisdom. And despite all the high noise, they were watching and they had internal confidence that these guys at the central bank are doing something serious, and we are hopeful that they will take us there where we want. So this is, I thought, to give you a flavor about the background of what has been happening at the central bank. The policy is mainly directed towards unleashing the fundamentals. We are not after quick wins. We are after really creating a strong foundation for industry, for exports, for agriculture, for services sector. And Egypt is working in all these directions. And despite what has been going on, and despite all the contractionary monetary policy that we have implemented, which was quite aggressive, the GDP growth grew by 5% in the last quarter. So this tells you that this economy has got a lot of energy and has a lot of capacity. And we see if we continue to build on this foundation by taking advantage and helping investors in our industrial sectors and otherwise getting where they want. Our corporate sector has been doing fantastic, has been growing at 30 to 40% every year, despite all the crisis. Our banking sector's profits have been growing at more than 50%. Our corporate sector is so strong, and the multinational sector, to the extent that they are not encouraged to export because they're making margins in the country, and the market is so large that it's still not that competitive, and still consumer power is not that big. This is, I hope I've been able to give you a flavor and a brief of what was going on in the background. I know you've been talking a lot of economics, but I know that I've been asked by Mr. Garbis the more specific details about how our investors here can make more money out of Egypt. Thank you.
So we will take few questions from the floor. Let me start before asking you about the challenge to bring down the inflation rate. The most recent figure on the inflation in September was that it increased by about 30% year on year. And it has been around this level for several months, although in the past few months it declined from a peak of 34 to 30%.
Yeah.
How you see, as a governor in the central bank, how quickly you could bring the inflation down, and what are the tools that you used?
Who wants inflation down?
Everyone wants it.
Investors want inflation down?
Consumers? Consumers?
Yeah, of course, in the domestic economy.
Yeah.
We believe that inflation has been subsiding tremendously. The latest figures have been very good and right on our forecasts. And as we said, at the central bank, for the first time, we have put an inflation target, a specific target, that by the last quarter of 2018, we're targeting inflation of 13% plus or minus 3. And this is, has been quite a commitment on ourselves, and this commitment has been taken in order to safeguard the independence of the central bank and make sure that any policy decision will be in this direction.
Now, how about monetary policy? You have the policy rate, you increase it by about 500 basis points in the past 6 months.
More.
Even more.
700.
And recently you announced to increase the reserve requirement on local currency deposits from 10 to 14%.
Correct.
Effective, in fact, yesterday. So how you see this tool will help you to bring down the inflation?
Well, as you know, these are all these are the tools of the central bank. And the tools of the central bank, we use it in order to make sure that inflation is on the forecast and where the target we want to achieve, whether it's the reserve requirement or the interest rates. However, reserve requirements is driven by a number of different factors, not just for inflation, but for other purposes. Reserve requirement is there to secure the banking system, make sure that there is reserves for financial stability. And the reserve requirement also helps us achieve a number of other objectives, not just inflation.
Mm-hmm. But the central bank, you have a target for inflation, let's say by mid-2018.
Yes.
How high is this target?
I said it's 13% plus or minus. The IMF in its latest statement said that they expect by mid-2018 inflation will be in Egypt around 10%. We respect what they say, but our announced inflation target for the second half of 2018 is 13% plus or minus. We believe we're going to achieve it. We are optimistic, very optimistic about it. We want later on the medium term to bring down inflation below to the single digit because we believe that this is very important for our financial markets internally and for our economic growth.
Mm-hmm. Another question on the exchange rate. When the depreciation happened in November of last year, and the market was expecting that it will depreciate to somewhere to the level of 14 per dollar, which was considered as the equilibrium exchange rate. Nonetheless, it continued to depreciate. Even in the IMF program, I think they were expecting that the exchange rate will settle between 13 to 15 for the pound. How you explain the sharp depreciation to 18?
The IMF has its own views. Doesn't mean that we always agree, okay? And we have our own forecasts, all right? The second thing, the exchange rate now is a market-driven price, okay? If the exchange rate has shot up at the beginning, it's known that in new regimes, when they're migrating from fixed exchange to floating, the exchange rate shoots up. Why the exchange rate shot up that much? I think because it was a new practice in the market. The market was not used to deal with the banking system. It was new to them, and the exchange rate depreciated very quickly. Plus, also, the market was burdened with some backlogs, financial backlogs at that time, dividends of multinationals or backlogs of open accounts between multinational and parent companies, which was cleared later on. Where the exchange rate is where it should be. Whether it's going to be where it's going to be, it is a market determination. And if the market, we want people to forget that the central bank is responsible for the exchange rate. And that's what we say in Egypt. The exchange rate is an indicator. And if you want to drive it somewhere, you have to deal with the fundamentals. If you want a stronger currency, you have to have more exports. You have to have more tourism revenues. We have been experiencing 50% increase in Egyptian workers' remittances the last few months compared to the previous year. This is substantial. We've experienced 200% increase in tourism revenues in March, April, and June compared to the previous year. We've experienced some increase in exports, a big slash in imports. All this, of course, contributes to a stronger currency. But when and how this currency moves, it depends on the market dynamics, on the flows, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another question on the capital flows. In fiscal year 2016-17, total capital flows were in the range of 40 to 50 billion. But the big chunk of that was in the form of portfolio, in the form of foreign non-residents buying local currency treasury bills. While the FDI, foreign direct investment, it increased, but it was around 8.5 billion, and mostly in the energy sector. How you look, how you expect this evolving in the coming years?
The statement is not very accurate. The bulk of the funds did not come from foreign investors, non-residents investing in treasury bills. We've received over $70 billion. We've received around $35 billion from the domestic market. So this is by far the largest amount of money we've received. So this is from our economy.
Yes.
We've received from Treasury bill investors $15 billion. We've received from bond investors appetite of $26 billion, and we've taken what's equivalent to $7 billion. We've received from international bilateral loans and multilateral loans and sovereign ECA credit for our projects, etc. We've received more than $20 billion. So it was, the economy has gained a lot of financial flexibility. Plus the economy has operating flexibility. If you have operating flexibility and financial flexibility is an ideal situation for growth.
Mm-hmm.
So we are not dependent on a certain source. And we make sure at the central bank that we are monitoring that, because our objective is to maintain and cement stability and predictability. We've been getting investors flows since the year 2000, and as far as I remember, was our central bank in 2003. We've always made sure that we give those investors a reasonable return, and we protect their capital, and whenever they exit, they get the money on time. So investors in Egypt never lost a dollar, neither on capital on our price. And in 2011, when the revolution took place, we had an outflow of $15 billion of investors' fund. They took their money at the same day. Even the investors who came out of the repatriation mechanism of the central bank, those are not guaranteed by the central bank. These are investors who came on their own risk through external channels. Still, the central bank, at this point in time, paid all those investors in December 2015. This was around $500 million. So we make sure that the investors get a reasonable return and that their capital is protected, because this is the reputation of our markets. And this we consider our obligation.
Looking ahead, what kind of structural reforms are being implemented to encourage more foreign direct investment in the non-energy sector? Because a big chunk of the FDI...
60%.
Yes,
is in the energy sector.
I mean, we heard the business environment has improved.
Yes.
There is a new investment law, and what other measures?
Of course, measures on the government side is not as fast as we are on finance, in the finance industry. We move much faster. But there has been a number of achievements in terms of the new investment law. This new investment law is a substantial project that has taken a lot of effort and has indulged into laws, intertangled laws of around 89 laws that go back to 1942. So there was a cleanup in the whole forest of laws that were around, and where investors were struggling. So the investment law is a very strong piece of achievement that has been taken forward and approved by the parliament. This is a big step.
Yeah.
We have initiatives, many initiatives at the government level for infrastructure projects for the Suez Canal corridor. The country has opened the economy in the power sector, in the renewable energy sector, in the real estate development sector, in the agriculture sector. And there has been reforms that took place in the Ministry of Investment and the Investment Authority. And there has been a restructuring of the way the investments are being processed. And there has been a strong tackling of the investment problems. We had disputes, investors' disputes of around 480 disputes in early 2016. More than 420 disputes were resolved. So there was a restructuring at the Ministry of Investment, at the dispute committee, at the structure, how these are matters are handled. This is a structural reform that's really difficult and which has been implemented. But however, the oil sector in Egypt still provides a very strong opportunity for investors, and this is something that we are proud of, because we have discovered huge oil gas reserves. And if Egypt has potential in oil and gas, that's fantastic.
That's good. One of the questions was that you mentioned in your speech that growth rate was around 5% in the last quarter. So average for the year probably it's around
Which
4%. Real GDP growth rate.
Growth rate.
Yeah. It's a little bit puzzling when you have a situation where the currency depreciates from 8.8 to 18. It's a sharp depreciation.
It is.
From the experiences of other countries, you notice
the land of the
initially
pharaohs.
you have recession or even moderation in the growth.
Look,
we haven't seen that in
the unregistered economy is so large. We've received a lot of funds from the unregistered economy since November in the banking system. Hundreds of billions. When we increase interest rates to 20% in some banks. Some banks put certificates for 3 years and 18 months for 20% and 16%. So the unregistered economy is quite large. And it's known in emerging markets and in African markets, you have the number of labor operating in the unregistered economy is usually more than 60% and 70%. So the unregistered economy is giving a lot of ammunition to the GDP as well. Also, our GDP growth has transformed from consumption-driven into net export-driven, which is a very good change. Also, we have public spending in investment projects that also contributed to the GDP because we have large infrastructure projects taking place. And I think those are going to pay off very well, whether in terms of the power sector, where there is no shortage of electricity for investors anymore. We have a power sector plan for the year 2030. And also in terms of road and logistics and ports that are being upgraded, we are upgrading 8 ports in the Red Sea. And we are investing a lot of funds on those ports upgrading. And this will help the Suez Canal Corridor industrial project that we are working on with partners from China and from other countries in the world. We also have been receiving a lot of interest from direct investments especially from the neighborhood. And we are discussing joint funds in large amounts for investment in Egypt because they realize this is one of very few opportunities, very few markets where you can get a good return and you have a market where demand is really quite strong. So Egypt is actually clear to the investors and they understand what they're talking about. So we had a foreign exchange gridlock. Now this is gone. So we want to make sure now that foreign exchange and currency is functioning and flowing into the proper channels in an orderly manner. I think that's what we were able to achieve. What the price is doesn't matter. What's important, it's available. We have no capital controls. We have signed Article 8 with the IMF years ago. Everybody, any investor, any individual is able to bring in capital or remit capital out of Egypt with no controls whatsoever. By the way, not many emerging markets has this advantage.
One last question on the banking situation. In general, the banking system in Egypt is sound. We see it from the capital adequacy ratio, which is high. Non-performing loans declined to around 5%. The only worry is the exposure of the banks to the government. Yeah. Because in the past 3-4 years, most of the financing of the fiscal deficit came from the domestic banking system. Is that changing now in the coming years?
Our banks are quite liquid. Our loans to deposit ratio is around 40%. This means there is a lot of upside. Of course, the last 7 years after the revolution gave the pain in terms of the economic growth and the industrial growth. Now, today we are witnessing political stability and now economic stability. So we are seeing a different environment. We believe that these ratios are going to improve. The banking system also has been vetted by the IMF, and the reports have been outstanding because the banking system has gone through reforms. We've done these reforms in 2004, 5, and 6. We witnessed the same problems that was witnessed in Asia in '97, without the exposure to the international world, but in terms of NPLs. Today, our NPL ratios are around, I think, 8%, fully provisioned. So the banking system is good and can easily finance growth and development. If they are exposed to the treasury bill markets, I think this is a price risk on the budget, and it's a risk on the economy in terms of inflation. And you understand that in markets where there is a big public debt, usually banks kind of get a little bit slow and lazy. And it's understood because they have risk-free rate returns. So the banks are comfortable with the returns. What we are trying to do at the central bank is induce more competitiveness at the banking level. We have the chairman of the banks here, and that's why we're bringing in a new law to increase competition and governance so that we induce banks to improve financial inclusion and financial intermediation. And we have a lot of debate about that, but we'll see where we are going to reach.
Thank you, Mr. Governor, for the comprehensive presentation and for your answers to some of the tricky questions. Thank you.
Thank you.